Welcome back to the Mr. I1 YouTube channel. If you're interested in personalized patrilineal analysis and having a video created regarding your direct patrilineal line, consider becoming a Patreon member. There is a link in the description of this video. The story for my Patreon members' direct patrilineal line begins in modern-day Sweden during the late Neolithic. He is positive for major branch IY2592. Now, unfortunately, we still don't have any ancient DNA samples from the late Neolithic or Bronze Age that are positive for major branch IY2592. But based on other ancient samples and modern distributions, I predict that Mr. IY2592 and his patrilineal descendants were most likely living for millennia in the blue shaded regions of East Central Sweden. My Patreon member can trace his earliest known ancestor to the village of Ewhurst Green in Sussex, England, to the year 1325 CE. And in the following map, you can see the location of Sussex in southeastern England. In the rest of this video, I'm going to make the argument that my Patreon members' forefathers entered England during the Viking Age. My first argument is that my Patreon member is positive for the very proficient Bronze Age branch IP109. In the 2022 study, The Anglo-Saxon Migration and the Formation of the Early English Gene Pool, there were 40 ancient DNA samples from England during the early Middle Ages that tested positive for haplogroup I1. And zero out of those 40 tested positive for major branch IP109. So we have zero evidence for IP109 in England prior to the Viking Age. My next argument is that my Patreon member's closest ancient DNA connection has an association with Danish Vikings in England during the Viking Age. The ancient sample was analyzed in the 2020 study, Population Genomics of the Viking World. In the family tree DNA database, he is labeled Oxford 20. And he branches apart from my Patreon members' direct patrilineal line with the I-FT98413 subclade, which dates approximately to the start of the current era, according to family tree DNA age estimates. To quote the supplemental information from the study in regards to this archaeological site, quote, "The unusual occurrence of charring of some skeletal elements examined in context with historical documentation points strongly towards these men being the Danish victims of King Ethelred's decree ordering their extermination in AD 1002, end quote. It's also interesting to note that in the preprint Steppe Ancestry in Western Eurasia and the Spread of the Germanic Languages, Mr. Oxford 20, also known as VK176, was assigned to the East Scandinavian autosomal genetic cluster. On the contrary, the Anglo-Saxons predominantly belong to the South Scandinavian autosomal genetic cluster. One might say that the mean age estimate for my Patreon member's terminal subclade and its parent branch predate the arrival of the Danes in England. Well, my rebuttal would be age estimates are just that. They're estimates. When you look at a 95% confidence interval for these branches, the time frame is much larger and does include the arrival of the Great Heathen Army in 865. Even if the age estimates are exact for those two branches, you could have a hypothetical scenario where the patrilineal divergence for those branches actually occurred in Denmark or Sweden, with my Patreon member's forefather and perhaps a distant cousin from the same village traveling to England together. So both patrilineal lines end up in England, even though that patrilineal divergence occurred before they arrived. One might say that Sussex, England, where my Patreon member's earliest known ancestor was from, is outside the area of the Danelaw where the Danes were known to have settled. And my rebuttal would be that over 500 years, there's ample opportunity for someone to move for a myriad of reasons. It's also important to note that one of my Patreon members' terminal subclade matches lists Nottingham, England for their earliest known ancestor location. And this is within the known Danelaw region. Unfortunately, my Patreon member only has one STR match at Y37, Y67, and Y111. They are all the same person. It is an individual that shares a similar surname to my Patreon member. He has a genetic distance of 7 at Y111. My Patreon member did some research and believes that they share a common patrilineal ancestor in Sussex, England, sometime in the 1500s. On average, a genetic distance of 7 at Y111 is around 13 generations back in time, which fits well with my Patreon members' research and theory. The good news is this match has already tested Big Y, so we're simply waiting for Family Tree DNA to create a new branch for them based on their shared private variants. Looking forward to the new branch and its age estimate. Thanks for watching.